Welcome in to the newest episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. We're glad to have you here with us, joining us for episode 65 of the pod. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking all things Darth Plagueis, as according to the novel that both Joey and I read. So we're going to get into some discussions about the book. But before we get into any of that, of course, if you have not checked out the Hoth Hangout channel on YouTube, definitely head over there and check us out and subscribe. Thank you to all 370 of you who are subscribed over on YouTube. Check out the video version of every podcast there, as well as our reactions to all new Star Wars shows when they do come out. Additionally, we are reachable via email at hothhangout@gmail.com. If you have any thoughts or questions, Star Wars related or otherwise, feel free to send those our way, and we'd love to share them here on the pod as well. The audio version of the Hoth Hangout podcast is findable anywhere you get your pods, including Apple and Spotify. And if you're listening on any of those platforms, feel free to leave us a 5-star review as well. We would very much appreciate it. And it does also allow the podcast to be discovered by more people too. Additionally, Hoth Hangout is reachable on the socials, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, or X. You can find us on each of those platforms. Once again, that's at Hoth Hangout. And again, today's topic, we are covering the Darth Plageuis Legends novel as written by James Luceno. So the question we would like to pose to you today as a little bit of a teaser is, do you have a favorite Star Wars book? Have you read any? And if so, which one is your favorite? That'll be part of our topic of conversation today. But before we get into that, Joey, what's going on? How you doing?
I'm cold, man. It's it's appropriate that we are named the Hoth Hangout because I think we're both pretty cold and pretty frozen over the past couple of days. It was real feel like -30 degrees Fahrenheit over the past couple of days, so it's been a cold one. In fact, we had to stop recording for a little bit because I had to address some power issues here at the house. But now we're good. But I think it's going to be a fun episode. Gibbo is unable to join us today, so I am definitely shooting for over an hour for today's discussion.
Throwback to one of the really old episodes where Joey and I would basically just like sit and talk and talk, and then when it hit like the 90-minute mark, we were like, "Oh, we should probably be done now, I guess." No, I don't know. I think today we might hit right around that hour mark. We'll see, but if anything, the news and the polls, the information we want to share about each of those will probably propel us into that around that hour mark. But oh, by the way, in regards to the cold weather too, I spent the majority of this weekend with people from from areas more southern in the United States than I
Oh,
am.
okay.
And so the place where we were did get down into the negatives at one point. And for most of them, like 40 is cold.
Oh,
And so it was like, oh, you only brought a sweatshirt. You're gonna regret that decision. No gloves. I feel bad for you. So,
yikes. Well,
anyways,
did they keep all their fingers and toes then?
no fingers and toes were lost, thankfully, over the weekend. So we made it out unscathed.
Good for
But
them.
yeah, pretty cold front hitting many parts of the United States, and it's been a chilly week, nonetheless to say. But like you mentioned, as appropriate named, this is Hoth Hangout. So if you're in the midst of that cold weather, thanks for being here with us, as we are also a part of the Hoth environment here on this podcast. So a couple small pieces of news we wanted to share. Actually, these are relatively big pieces, I would argue. Before we get into our discussion of Darth Plagueis, the first of which, and probably the biggest piece of news we've received in a while in the Star Wars universe, is that we have officially received confirmation that the second season of Ahsoka is fully in development. And this was, I believe, posted on X or Twitter, whatever it is now, X, by the official Star Wars Twitter handle. And the caption, of course, with this simply said, "The story continues. Ahsoka season 2 is now in development with Dave Filoni." And if you are watching the video version of the podcast, there's this really cool hand sketched image with it, who looks to be Ahsoka and maybe Balin on the edge of the hand of the father, or
I was
who
I was
would you
reading
say
it.
that other
I was
person
reading it was
is?
Ahsoka and Sabine.
It does. It's like so hard to tell who that other
Yeah.
character
You're
is.
saying
Yeah, I could see it being.
Ahsoka's in the front, right? That's who
Oh
you're.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Ahsoka's
And
the one
then
on the
yeah.
finger.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
the other
remember.
one in the background
Yeah, I
does
don't
look more
remember
like
Sabine.
Sabine
Yeah, Sabine has more of the that shorter
or
cape.
Ezra. Ezra,
Oh, and
maybe.
Ezra. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, he doesn't even have the. We can't see his sparkling blue eyes from here, so
Yeah,
we can't make for certain.
yeah. But the other notable point about the image is that they're standing on the hand of the father, one of the Mortis gods, who we saw Balin standing on in the last scene of, or one of the last scenes of season one. So the story continues. Development of Ahsoka season two is officially underway. I don't think this is really a surprise to anyone, considering I think the show was pretty successful in the grand scheme of Star Wars shows. So official confirmation in what we all thought would likely be happening anyways, but it's just exciting to sort of see this first piece of concept art nonetheless. Do you have any expectations, not to go too off of our topic
Hmm.
today, but any expectations in regards to not so much the Thrawn stuff, but specifically the Balin and Mortis God stuff?
Man, I'm really curious of how they're going to approach that now. Now that Ray Stevenson's passing, yeah, I don't know what they're gonna do. I had really high hopes. I was thinking if he hadn't had passed, how this all would have been just really exciting, and so of course now the real world we do have to think about. Well, are they going to continue that story?
Hmm.
Will they continue that story? Will they recast that character? So there's a lot of questions up in the air. And like you said, season two was inevitable, but how long has it been since the finale? It does not seem like that long ago, but it probably has been a few months.
Yeah, gosh, 4 months I want to say. I mean, I could just check our YouTube channel real quick and give you kind of a general idea. No, I guess it's been only about 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, over 3 months time since the end of season one. And I will say the something that this image does make me excited about is that it almost recognizes that they're not just gonna abandon the Mortis God
Sure.
storyline, I think. It's not just gonna be like, oh, well, this was what we were going with Balin, and now that we can't do the Balin storyline the way we wanted to, we're just gonna scrap the whole thing. At least there's going to be some acknowledgement, or maybe they'll just keep going with the story the
Mm-hmm.
way it was going, in season 2. So that's exciting, I guess, in that kind of whatever Balin was building towards, I don't think they're just gonna abandon it
Mm-hmm.
in the plot of the 2nd season.
Do you think they would do anything like how they did with Leia in Rise of Skywalker? With
I don't know. I
yeah,
highly doubt it.
yeah.
If anything, they might do something like they've done with young Luke, but also
Mm-hmm.
you have to think about, like, this is an actor who's just passed away. I feel like it would be a little what's the word?
Insensitive.
Yeah, insensitive to, like, put his face on another actor.
So
So if I
quickly.
had to
Mm-hmm.
right, if I had to guess, they'll either use scrapped footage from season 1 and put him minimally in this season, um, or there's, I guess, 3 options. That would be option 1. Option 2 is that we just don't see him at all, and he's alluded
Mm-hmm.
to throughout the season. I guess they could do. Option 3 is that they recast the character. And I'm honestly not sure what they're gonna do amongst those
What would you prefer?
options. I think for the sake of a great story, I think the 3rd option makes
Yeah.
the most sense. Yes, it'll be weird because it'll be a different actor, but I think you just kinda have to acknowledge that. Like, obviously, with the actor's untimely passing, like, that's not the outcome any of us wanted to have someone else playing the role. But, like, obviously, that's kind of the world we live in, and so
Right.
I prefer that as to the character just kind of going away, you know? Um, but I don't that's me personally. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'd for the sake of the story, I would go with the third one as well, where they recast the character, because you and I both, and I think a lot of people really enjoyed the character, and
Mhm.
I have a feeling they recognize that, and they don't want to just be a throwaway character. I think they'll invest time, money into recasting someone else and continue on with the story. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah. And I would, I think it's safe to assume that if they do choose to recast, like, the person who plays the role is they're probably gonna make him look very similar to Ray Stevenson's portrayal of
Hmm.
it, I would imagine. So, but anyways, yeah. So all that to say, Ahsoka season 2 is officially confirmed. I hope we get this in 2025. I'd be pretty disappointed if it's not in 2025,
Hmm.
but we'll see. I don't know. That seems like a likely timeline, right?
I think so. I mean, yeah, they know they gotta do work on this one pretty quickly, and it
Yeah.
really depends on. I'm not saying that Acolyte or Skeleton Crew are going to be really weak, but in comparison to Ahsoka, in comparison to a Mandalorian or an Andor, you're going to have to come, definitely come back pretty quick, and have a lot of Ahsoka coming up. So I wouldn't be surprised. I really hope that's what they're gonna do as well.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And anyone listening, let us know what your thoughts are on the character of Balin, how you think they should go about it. But anyways, we've spent I guess a good deal of time talking about the second season of Ahsoka. We do have one other piece of news we want to share. Now, this one is I don't know how to feel about this.
Hmm.
So there is a rumor speculating that there might be a Star Wars What If series. And I guess if you're not familiar with this, there already is a Marvel What If series. Marvel and Star Wars both, of course, being owned by the parent company of Disney. And I think I read the article correctly. There was even talk at one time of there being like a Marvel Star Wars crossover, which I would have been so out on personally. Like, I love Star Wars and I like Marvel, but I don't really have a desire to have them be in each other's worlds. That's just not something that I think A works and B that most people really want that badly. I think there'd be way more likelihood to kind of mess something up if they decide to do that. Of course, this is a what if story potentially. So, it's I think the caveat to a what if story is kind of the same way that we as Star Wars fans feel about Star Wars Visions, for example, or maybe retroactively the way we feel about Star Wars Legends, in that it doesn't obviously impact the canon of the story
Right.
or the way we view the overall narrative of the main plot of what Star Wars is. But it's also like it's exciting to speculate about these things, and it's something that I would like to see, but kind of just as its standalone Star Wars thing, not necessarily as a Marvel thing. I don't even know if this is something that would work. What do you think?
I think it'd be a fun little thing, a fun little project. I think we should let some fans do this. We've seen what they could do with the Clone Wars, so I think this could be. I mean, but to be honest, if they could develop some cool like what if situations, like what if Padme did make it, and so I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of those discussions we've had through the fandom, like these types of what if situations, to have them kind of fleshed out. I think would be pretty cool. I mean, the photo we have here on the video version of the podcast, we have, obviously Anakin in the Vader suit, but then we also have Obi-Wan and looks like an Imperial officer suit, and I guess what is Ahsoka like an
Like an
Inquisitor or something?
inquisitor?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's going all over the place. So I think it would be fun to see. I mean, if you the thing is with the Marvel universe is that there is already an established multiverse, right?
Mhm.
That's kind of their whole thing. In Star Wars, there isn't really, unless you call the world between worlds that type of thing. I don't know if you necessarily call that a multiverse, but it's along the same lines as it. So as long as we say what if is going to be just like you said, something like Visions, where there's no constraints, there's nothing really affecting canon. It purely is this is fan service. Like, yeah, we've heard you guys. We've heard the conversations. Yeah, let's just make a story, a fun little story about how I don't know, how Watto is now a Jedi or something, or just random little things like that. I think it would be fine, but so I don't really put too much emphasis either way on whether I really want or don't want this. I mean, we'd watch it. Let's be honest. We'd watch it if it came out, and we would like some things, we wouldn't like some things, but at the end of it, it wouldn't really matter because, again, not hitting anything canon.
Yeah. I think the two things that immediately came to mind, maybe even three, I think people might be frustrated with the last of these three I'm about to say. If I were to get a what if series, I would love to see um like what if Anakin went with Obi-Wan before the Battle of Mustafar? I would love to see What if Dooku never betrayed the Jedi Order?
Mm.
And I would love to see what if Luke had turned to the dark side when the
Oh,
Emperor like called him over.
I
Those
like
are
it.
those are three big ones for me that if we get a what if series, I wanna see at least one of those
Yeah,
addressed.
yeah. We need a Star Wars poll to they need to poll the fans to see which what ifs they want. We
Oh,
want.
that'd be fun. That's like, have you ever heard that story about how the fate of Robin was decided in the Batman comics?
Mm-mm.
They polled the fans. The Joker kidnapped Robin, and then between that issue and the next issue, they sent this like this was back when obviously the internet didn't exist, so people had to like write in their choice for the poll. But of course, it only got like I don't know 6,000 votes or something because everyone had to like write it and then mail it back to the
Right.
company. And so the vote was like 51% for Robin to die and
Wow,
49% for Robin to
it
live.
was that
So
close.
yeah, yeah.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
so the
crazy.
fans got to decide. Anyways, this could be something like that where the fans get to, decide the
I'm
outcome of, what happens.
I'm gonna guess it's gonna be more than 6,000 votes though.
Yeah, yeah.
That's like the
In the
first
age of the
15
internet, I
minutes.
would hope so. Oh, yeah, or maybe the first 30 seconds even, something like that.
Right.
But anyways, a potential Star Wars What If series. Nothing confirmed yet, but just being rumored. I think it'd be fun, but of course, that remains to be seen if this will ever actually come to fruition or not. And until then, we set our sights forward and see if we'll get it someday. One of the last things we wanted to touch on before we dive into our discussion of Darth Plagueis is a couple viewer comments we wanted to showcase, as well as the responses to a few of the polls we posted last week regarding people's favorite animated Star Wars series. The first comment we have this week is featured from last week's video. Spy on Sports writes Lego Freemaker Adventures. Actually, my favorite animated Star Wars series, which included one of my favorite Star Wars droids, R0GR. I hope I'm saying the droid name right. It's funny because you mentioned in
Mm-hmm.
our episode last week about animated Star Wars that we didn't include any of the Lego stuff because I think you and maybe you've seen more than me. I've only seen the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but my Lego Star Wars experience is relatively limited, so maybe this is another one I've got to add to the list to watch.
Right, and this was the one that I was struggling to remember. It was the Freemaker Adventures that I actually had seen a couple of episodes of this, and I can't tell you that I did or did not like it. I think it just I just happened to watch a couple episodes and just never continued. So this may be I may have to go watch this now because of Spy on Sports.
Nice. Lego Freemaker Adventures. Check it out on a Disney Plus near you. Thank you to Spy on Sports for our first comment. Our second one was from Lord Galvatron, who says, uh, in response to the question of the day, I've already talked about it in the comment sections of plenty of your other videos, but I'll put it in the comment section too. In this comment section too. Clone Wars is my favorite Disney era Star Wars animated series for all the reasons you both mentioned, but also because of the Siege of Mandalore. That arc to me is some of the best Star Wars has to offer, animated or live action. I know me saying this is like hearing a broken record at this point, but I'll die before I stop worshiping the Siege of Mandalore. Hey, the Siege of Mandalore, that is some top notch Star Wars
Mm-hmm.
content. I can't disagree with you on that. I also love the Clone Wars. I have no qualms with this comment from from Lord Galvatron.
Absolutely, and I wonder if what if we ever got a live action version of that? I think that would be pretty sweet.
Oh, that'd be amazing. I would be so down for that. Just I don't think they'll ever do it because the era of the Clone Wars is already so fleshed out,
Yeah.
and there's so many other eras that I think are going to take primacy in terms of storytelling moving forward. But man, if I could get the Siege of Mandalore in live action, that'd be one of my first picks too. So
No doubt.
Um, thank you again to Lord Galvatron for that comment. Our third and final comment is from our wonderful Aunt Vesuvi, who says, "Thanks to Ben, Joey, and Gibbo, I'm thrilled we're getting a second season of Ahsoka. The Jar and Grogu movie should be fun. It'll be interesting to see how many people will pay for a ticket and haul themselves to a cinema for it. I surely will. Congratulations for finally starting Resistance, Ben. As I advised you before, as is the only consistently goofy one. The rest of the characters are just as grounded or grow to be as any other show. Accept and forgive his clumsiness. Pay attention to his relationships. By episode 6, she'll be in the groove. Star Wars animation I'm so glad these titles exist and are reaching creative minds. My bronze tier holds Young Jedi Adventures, which have seen many of to observe design elements. If I were 5 years old, it would be at the tippity top. Silver tier contains the Clone Wars, Tales of the Jedi, and Visions. Gold tier contains Rebels, Resistance, and the Bad Batch. So Anvasuvi giving us the tier list there at the end as well. Appreciate you, Anvasuvi. And in regards to Resistance, I will say I do enjoy the character of Kaz. I get what you're saying though about him being kind of like a little bit eccentric and goofy, but that's kind of just how the vibe of the show is. And I also have no qualms with how Resistance is going for me so far. And as another teaser, Joey and I are going to be doing a episode here in about 6 weeks or so on Star Wars Resistance. So stay tuned for that as well. Joey, will you be picking up and hauling yourself to the cinema, as Amvasuvi
Oh,
says?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, any type of Star Wars movie I'll be there for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, opening night, maybe we could
Oh,
do
yeah.
like, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So we also had two polls. We posed the same question once on X and the other one on the YouTube community tab. The question was, what is your favorite Star Wars animated series? The On the X side of things, um, the response, or no, excuse me, on the YouTube side of things, the response was very lopsided towards Clone Wars, which received 71% of the vote, followed by Rebels, then Bad Batch with 9%, Tales of the Jedi with 5, and Resistance with 4. I was surprised that I guess Rebels, over at least on YouTube, was so much lower than Clone Wars. I feel like those two tend to be pretty close.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, yeah, when you compare it to the X numbers where Clone Wars was at 48%, Rebels was at 40%, Bad Batch at 11, and we only have four options on Twitter X. Tales of the Jedi got 0%, so that's absolutely nobody voted for that. But yeah, and it was much closer between Clone Wars and Rebels on the Twitter X side. So kind of surprised that it didn't show also on the YouTube side. Maybe it just shows the who is actually either watching us or who is um just the general population of Star Wars fans on YouTube. I don't know. I wish we had some statistics analysis and analysis here to understand these numbers a little bit better. But yeah, Clone Wars definitely came on top on both of those though. Either way.
YouTube watchers tend to be more Clone Wars centric. Is that
Yeah, yeah, I
what
think
we're
so.
learning
Yeah,
from this?
yeah.
Well, anyways, thank you to those of you who did respond to the poll, and be on the lookout this week for perhaps a poll going live, likely sometime this weekend. So, I imagine the question of the week once again will be, what is your favorite Star Wars book? And we'll throw some options up there for that as well. So stay tuned for that. On the YouTube community tab or over on Twitter, at Hoth Hangout once again over there. And I guess now that we're a whole, I don't know, 22, 23 minutes into this episode, I guess we should start our discussion of the book. For those that don't know, next week, as a little bit of a teaser, we're also doing a special episode 66 based almost entirely on the character of Darth Sidious or Palpatine. And so we thought a fun precursor to our episode 66 would be a discussion of Palpatine's master, Darth Plagueis, as referenced in the Darth Plagueis novel by James Luceno. This book is just over a decade old. In fact, I think it just celebrated its 12th birthday recently, on January 10th, I believe it was. January 10th, 2012 was the original release date of this book. And I guess maybe for those of you who have absolutely zero knowledge of who Darth Plagueis even is, maybe that's a good place to start. The character of Darth Plagueis is canon. However, everything that takes place in this book is technically not. And so the reason the character is canon, if you'll remember, there's a scene in episode 3 of Revenge of the Sith where Anakin walks into the space. I never even know what that is. It's like a space opera with
Mm-hmm.
like, floating bubble stuff going on. And, uh, he and Palpatine have this long conversation, which eventually, diverges into Palpatine telling him about this Sith Lord, who obviously Palpatine is not, laying his laying his full hand down yet and saying that he is the apprentice of this Sith Lord that he's telling a story about. But the story is about Darth Plagueis. And so, Joey, to that, I just have one question to ask you. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
I have. I have.
And I guess what were your general thoughts
Mhm.
on the story of Darth Plagueis as you got to read this book?
Well, this was a very, and we talked a little bit about this, going into the recording of today's show. This is very politics heavy. Um,
Hmm.
this book is very politics heavy. So if that's something that you're not really interested in, I'm not entirely sure if this book would be for you. Um, I'll be honest, there were times when I kind of just zoned out and I'm like, I don't like this. There's just too much going on. Like I understand it lines up a ton of storylines, whether it's with Count Dooku. By the way, very cool that we saw Count Dooku. Whether it was him or some of the senators from various planets, and I mean, there was, if the prequels really set you up for anything, is really showing you how important the politics of the Star Wars universe was,
Hmm.
going into the original trilogy, because you don't really see it at all there. You see two sides, and that's kind of it. And same with the sequel trilogy, but the prequels really kind of set that up for everyone. Now, I'm thinking about this book. This book came out in 2012, which was what, 7 years after Revenge of the Sith. Does that sound about right?
Yes, 7 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had kind of had all that time to put this together, and I think it's a well written book. That, like I said, though, with me being the general Star Wars type of lightsabers versus bad versus evil, there was a lot of just talking in this one. There was a lot of setting things up for things to come later, and which kind of makes sense because, again, Darth Plagueis is something that happened in Palpatine slash Sidious's past. So we had to kind of see that where Sidious, or where Palpatine kind of grew up through, and there was really big jumps in time eras. There would be like a 10-year jump, a 20-year jump, kind of in the middle of this. So part of me kind of got confused of like, well, what should have happened in that time? Because that's it's quite a significant. Because we're used to seeing like Star Wars movies being a year apart in real time, or
Hmm.
just months apart or a day apart, and this is like a huge era, and I guess maybe in the prequels we saw like 9-10 year jumps, but those were between movies, not within the same movie. So within this book we saw a couple of those, and I mean, I thought it was good. There were a couple of, like I said, appearances that I really enjoyed. I like seeing that Dooku was mentioned pretty early. Darth Maul, or mentioned as Maul. We kind of saw the beginning of his journey when Palpatine kind
Hmm.
of picked him up and introduced him, and so that was I thought that was really cool. I mean, those are really cool parts of it. So I'm getting too like deep into it, but I mean, essentially the overall story I think was pretty good. It was just really interesting to see Palpatine go from not really knowing the power he has all the way up to the end, where, spoiler alert, he ends up actually murdering and killing Plagueis, because that's
Hmm.
just what you got to do as as a Sith. Just feels like that's a requirement. So I enjoyed it for that. I can see how, again, the politics of it may not be up everyone's alley. I like I said, I was listening to the audiobook, and I tend to, it's a lot easier for me to zone out every now and then if I'm not reading it directly.
Hmm.
So I think there were times when I'm like, oh wow, I missed the whole 5 minutes, and I'm not quite sure it really matters, because they'll it may be good for that moment, but yeah, I thought that's kind of what my initial thoughts were about it. What about you?
Yeah, I guess to talk about two of the things that you mentioned, the first one you mentioned, I think, was kind of the political nature of the novel, and I mentioned this to you before we started recording. I think there is a pretty sizable contingent of Star Wars fans who um, kind of look at the prequels as saying these are way too politically influenced and politically motivated. And like, why do we care about trade routes and taxation? And, like, how did all of this even get to the point where it is? Like, I don't like basically, I don't want all these politics in my Star Wars sort of thing. To those people, I would say, either A, read this book because it will explain a lot
Hmm.
of the reasons why things are the way they are at the beginning of episode 1, The Phantom Menace. If you're wanting more insight and clarification, to those same people, I might also say B, maybe don't read it if you really don't like politics in your Star Wars. Um, because basically, if you don't like the prequels for their politics, you might not like this book because there are oftentimes like 3 or 4 pages where it's just like a group of senators or high ranking people with different organizations like the banking clan and just where Darth Plagueis, whose like civilian name is Hugo Damask, who he's just like kind of having these conversations, like kind of coercing people to do something. Where there's just extended pages of like how this benefits the Trade Federation versus the banking clan and blah 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 blah. So um, if you're skeptical of politics in Star Wars, I would say read this. If you outright can't stand it, maybe don't read this. Um, but yeah, there is a ton of mention of politics. I actually have never minded kind of that, the way that those that episodes 1, 2, and 3, but particularly episodes 1 and 2 kind of lean towards a heavy political emphasis. I guess particularly the Phantom Menace. So this just kind of felt really enlightening to me in a way that I received a lot of information and background on stuff that I didn't really realize before. And I'm sure as we're talking, like probably more and more of those things will probably just pop into my head. One of them that I'm going to mention right off the bat is kind of the relationship of the Kaminoans to the original creation of the clones and like how Plagueis and Palpatine and even Sifo-Dyas kind of all fit into that. Speaking of Sifo-Dyas, he is
That's
in
cool.
this book as well. Yeah. A bit of a shout out for your guy there, Sifo-Dyas.
Number 5 on my Jedi list, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so the first thing to respond is that it is very politically heavy in its tone. Another thing I was going to mention, I also did not realize that Orn Free Taa, the Ryloth senator in one of the is it a Rebels arc or a Clone Wars arc or maybe both? Um, the big blue
Hmm.
Twi'lek
Yes.
on Ryloth, the senator, he is the one who first nominates Palpatine to
Right.
be
Yes.
Supreme Chancellor. I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. Yeah.
Right. I didn't realize that was the same one. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense now.
Yeah. But anyways, there's just like there's so many scenes like in the Senate. Anyways, very politically heavy. The second thing I was going to respond to that you mentioned was also the fact that it can be hard to track sometimes because it does take place over such a wide span of years. There's kind of 3 parts of this book. The first part is very focused on Plagueis, and then Palpatine sort of slowly comes into the story as a young like 17-year-old sort of kind of rebelling from his parents, especially his father. And that's kind of the theme of the first third of the book is sort of the origins of Plagueis, and then eventually like the incorporation of Palpatine sort of going under his tutelage, if you will, as a very very young man. And so the middle third of the book is, I guess there. So the first third is from 67 to 65 BBY. The middle third is from 54 to 52 BBY. And then the final third is from 42 to 34 BBY, which, if you're like a Star Wars historian, that third one might stand out to you in particular because it does take place during the early events of the Phantom Menace, And in fact, I might have even typed the dates wrong in here. I think it might even be 44 to 32 BBY.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, as I'm looking for the dates, what's important to note is that the final part of or the final couple years of the third part of this book take place like as the Phantom Menace is going. And so for
Right.
the final like 50 to 75 pages of the book, it's like as as Palpatine and Plagueis are talking to each other, like Qui-Gon Jinn is fighting Maul on
Mm-hmm.
Tatooine. So there's just these cool things that are
Yeah.
happening simultaneously together. But again, it does kind of make the story somewhat hard to track at times because of just the different stages of um, kind of stuff that goes
Mm-hmm.
on throughout the story. And actually, as we look at an image of Plagueis here, if you're watching the video version of the podcast, maybe just a quick explanation as to why he has this breathing apparatus on. There's something that goes on. I believe it's in the second act, or maybe really early in the third act of the book, um, where he now needs this apparatus on his mouth to breathe. So if you're wondering in this podcast why some images of Plagueis he has that on and some he doesn't, there is something that happens to him that makes
Yes.
him need that at some point in this book. So um, another kind of just brief general overview of the way the Sith master apprentice relationship works in regards to this book. Um, the book opens up, which is actually something I'm going to talk about at the end of today's podcast as one of my favorite parts of this book. The book opens up. The prologue of it is Sidious essentially uh, killing Plagueis, or he has just killed Plagueis in the prologue, um, and it's kind of just him like reflecting on that. And then the final couple chapters of the book is like witnessing that go down essentially. So it connects the beginning to the end in a sense.
Yeah.
Eh,
I mean, when that happens, Sidious or Palpatine has a pretty long. It feels like really drawn out. There's just a lot of things that he has to say
oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, it was like a couple of pages if I remember correctly. I'm like, wow, he's really laying into Plagueis here. So that hate is real.
You listened to
Um,
the audiobook, didn't you?
I did.
I felt it even more in the audiobook.
Right.
It was like, oh my gosh, she's just going at him right now.
Yeah. I mean, I just picture him standing over a dying Plagueis, just saying all these things to him, and and one thing about this book is that it's not the good guy story, right? It is not
Hmm.
the Jedi's, it's not the rebels. These are the some of the origins of evil of the Sith. So you kind of have to come to expect some of that brutal, some of those brutal imagery that maybe you don't normally would get in the middle of Yavin 4. These are, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, we can't talk about Plagueis the Wise unless we talk about how he came to understand how to save people or save
Right.
species out there. You think about it. You heard that little quick thing in Revenge of the Sith. You don't really think about what it would take in order to do something like that, right? Well, we come to find out that he has, essentially a lab. I don't know what else you would call it, right? Like a lab of different types of species where he's basically just keeping these species barely alive. In
Mhm.
some cases, in the case of the one dark side user who his master Tenebris had kind of had sent out. Wait, what was it? No, was it?
Y- Yeah.
Is that
So
right? It was
yeah.
Tenebris's. Yeah,
So
remind me of that part of Venomous here.
yeah. So Tenebris, who was the master of Plagueis,
Hmm.
um, the first chapter of this book is kind of like Plagueis, you know, seizing the moment and killing Tenebris. And so Tenebris had this plan in place where if Plagueis was to ever do that, then these other, assassins that he had trained or employed would come
Right.
after Plagueis. And so one pretty early on in the book, one of them is Venomous or Darth Venomous, I guess, since he's not like technically a Dark Lord, but he's a dark side force user who's
Right.
wielding a lightsaber. But yeah, he's like one of the people who Plagueis keeps in the lab, and
Right. For how
just
long?
cruelly,
Like 30 years or
yeah,
something,
like
right?
basically the whole book, because
Right.
there's a part like in the second or third to last chapter where it says like Plagueis finally like let him die or something, and I'm like, dang, but he captured him in like 67 BBY and experimented on him until like 32 BBY.
Right.
So he just like had him, I guess that more than 30 years he was,
Yeah.
cruelly experimenting on this guy. Anyways, yeah, he had this
Yeah.
weird lab.
Yeah, and somehow even through all of this they're able to get kind of a lovable droid in there. you know
Yeah.
what was it, 114D? I think that was the
Yep.
droid's name.
Yeah. Plagueis' companion.
Yeah, so the way he came across 114D is, didn't he, it was early on that he had essentially murdered, and it wasn't Tenebrus's droid, right? It was just some other, I can't remember the early part of it now that I think about it, but essentially
No,
he,
it was on the ship with it was like in chapter 3, I think, with the ship full of other, I don't know if they were bounty hunters or what they were,
mm,
but the ship he stowed away on, and then he ends up,
oh, that's
spoiler
right. Yes,
spoiler,
yes, yes.
killing all of them. And so
That's right.
I
Yes,
think
yes,
the
yes,
droid
yes.
was on that ship.
Yeah, it was on that ship, and then the droid is like, "Oh, well, now you're my master,"
Yeah,
essentially, and
yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, well," and it was kind of cute.
And there's some irony there too, because in the very last scene of the book, the droid says the exact same thing to Palpatine that he said
Right.
that when Plagueis killed, the other, the group of people who he took the droid from, and he says, I guess you're my master now to Plagueis. Like 25 years later, when Palpatine kills Plagueis, the droid is like, well, Palpatine, you're my master now.
Right. No loyalty at all to whoever they originally went to, but
Yeah,
I don't know, like, again, somehow was able to throw in a cute little droid in all of this in the middle of this madness. Um but yeah, so, kind of going back to Plagueis the Wise, the story. I mean, yeah, it was a very very brutal how he came across doing that. And to me, this is something that I didn't really follow or get. I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, it's clear that Palpatine, Sidious never really learned that side, that like that part
hmm
the the Sith power to do that. And I don't know, kind of seems like a waste. It seemed like that, after all this time, now that we know this, again, this isn't canon or anything like that, but if it were, I mean, Plagueis spent all this time. We spent this entire book essentially torturing different species and understanding midichlorians and how to manipulate them in order to kind of bring life back. But all of a sudden, this all happens, and then now he's just gone, and that knowledge just disappears. It kind of seems like a waste because we have this moment in Revenge of the Sith when we learn about it, and of course that's what Anakin hears and he wants to learn more about. I mean, we know that Palpatine never had that understood that how to do that process, but now knowing all of this, now having read it and been a part of it, it just seems like it's kind of cheap that it's just gone now.
Yeah. It also, so it makes me, I think there was a part maybe, oh, I don't know. It was in the third part of the book where um, Plagueis and Palpatine are having a conversation about the way that knowledge is passed down through the Sith line,
Hmm.
and Plagueis actually explicitly says that written knowledge is kind of not what not what he advises, or is almost like abhorred by the Sith, because like person to person verbal passing of the information is in his mind the most like pure way to pass down that knowledge. So in a sense it does make sense why he
Mm.
wouldn't have recorded the information down anywhere. But as for like sharing it with Palpatine, I also think every Sith Lord just kind of has like different, I don't know, specialities or interests in terms of kind of their assuasion to how they use the dark side.
Hmm.
Like Palpatine, as we learn in this novel, especially, is kind of like the smooth talking, well to do politician who,
Right.
operates this very double life, one side is Darth Sidious and the other side is this very successful Naboo senator. Whereas, you know, Darth Plagueis, while he did operate as Hugo Damask, as this like almost like this executive within the Damask enterprises that he owned, um, and was doing stuff behind the scenes as well as his civilian name. You kind of see the older he gets, the more and more he becomes fascinated with kind of the midi-chlorians and the
Right.
interest in cloning, especially kind of like what you were talking about. So I do think part of that is that just that every Sith Lord kind of has a different thing that they take an interest in.
Hmm.
And Plagueis even talks about like with his master Tenebris, how they always kind of differed in the way they saw things too. So um, yeah, I mean, it is kind of sad that that information was lost. It didn't really seem like Palpatine ever made a strong effort to have Plagueis like he share that information with him. I think Palpatine, to my surprise, actually was pretty content for the majority of this book, just kind of being the apprentice of Plagueis. At least it felt that way reading it, and then all of a sudden at the end, it kind of felt like a switch
Right.
got flipped. He's like,
Right.
"I'm so tired of being your,"
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
um,
I feel like that happened pretty quickly,
yeah.
and this was my interpretation of it. And correct me if I'm wrong. I want to hear what you have to say about it. But it seemed like Plagueis was kind of cool, just being him and Palpatine.
Oh yeah.
There was no need to continue on with, the rule of two or whatever it was, and where the apprentice has to kill the master, and it just seemed very much like a partnership. I get that, and especially when it was discussed that Palpatine would end up being the Supreme Chancellor,
Mhm.
and uh Plagueis would kind of just be kind of in the shadows, kind of co-chancellor, but not really. I don't know how they would work that I don't know how you work that on the ballot, but, um, but essentially, it would be the two of them kind of running the Senate and, being the chancellor there. And, and to me, kind of, when I was listening to all of this, I was like, these are pretty good ideas, like it makes sense. Obviously, just like you said, Palpatine was kind of the smooth talker, the face, of it all, and Plagueis would have been more of the puppet master, just kind of setting things in place. And it seemed like they were really good at it. So when it kind of flipped it on its end at the end there, where he's just like, "I will never share this with you," or the being the chancellor, I would, and I don't know, I felt like it was like it would be one thing if throughout the book you saw like frustrations in Palpatine and kind
Mhm.
of growing and growing over time, but I just didn't get that feeling. So I was a little confused. I understand that that's just kind of the Sith way. Oh, and also there was a lot of reference to Bane and
Mhm.
Nihilus and other former Sith. Part of me felt a little bit lost because obviously this is the first book I've ever read, within Legends or EU. So I mean, obviously I'm gonna like, well, now I got to read all that, but
Yeah.
but at the same time, I'm just like, all right, well, is there more information that I need to understand in order to understand some of the references they're making here? So there may be a little bit of knowledge that I just need to get, but again, the arc of Palpatine, it just didn't seem like it made sense to me at the end necessarily, where all of a
Mhm.
sudden he's just really, really mad at Plagueis and he's got to do this. There was never like an internal dialogue or anything like that with Palpatine in my eyes, where it
Right.
kind of warranted all and you heard it too, all of that hate, all of that rage over that time. I mean, it was kind of funny because at the same time as he was kind of, essentially raging on Plagueis, he was also kind of thanking him here and there too. Like,
Yeah.
if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have all this power. But you know what? Like that's just kind of what that's. So it kind of didn't make sense to me from that standpoint. But again, I hadn't read all of the other books too, so I don't know if there's something I'm missing along the lines where as you're learning from your master, maybe there's just something more that happens to you that that you didn't even expect.
Yeah, I think the Bane books are pretty foundational
Hmm.
in terms of the information they provide just to the rest of particularly Star Wars Legends, but definitely Star Wars just novels as a whole.
Hmm.
Um, I would probably say also the Revan books along with the Darth Bane books. But in terms of this book, Darth Plagueis, the Bane books are important because for those that don't know, Darth Bane is the Sith Lord that established the rule of two because there was so much infighting amongst the Old Republic Sith Lords that they all just kind of killed each other off. So Darth Bane establishes, well, there's always going to be one master and one apprentice. And I think the part that people often forget about the rule of two is that it's not just that there's always a master and apprentice. It's also that the natural cycle of things posits that the apprentice will eventually usurp the master and take on his
Right.
own new apprentice.
Hmm.
And so that is the part of the rule. So when Plagueis says I'm doing away with the rule of two, he's not saying there's not going to be not a master and apprentice. He's saying we're not going to have to do this second part of this, which is that the apprentice doesn't have to take over the master anymore, because in Plagueis's mind, he and Palpatine are just going to live forever
Right.
once he figures out how to influence the
Right.
midi chlorians to extend his life to become immortal. So, um, obviously Palpatine didn't see things that way.
Right.
Um, but that's how it kind of all relates to Darth Bane. There is almost this pride amongst definitely Plagueis and I would say Palpatine, Sidious too, um, to say, we're descended from the line of Bane. We're
Right.
one
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the Darth Bane. We're of the Darth Bane lineage, so to speak. In that, my master was this master, whose master was this master, whose master. It's almost
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a Sith family tree. You're like, I'm the
Right. Yeah.
great great grand Sith of Darth Bane.
Right.
Fear me. Yeah. So there's a little bit of like ancestry to it all in a
Hmm.
way, but Plagueis' plan to do away with the rule of two obviously
Right.
didn't pan out for him the way he
It did
wanted it
not.
to.
No.
And the last thing I'll say about midi chlorians, which I know some people are like, that doesn't exist. Well, sorry, it kind of does, but they elaborate on it also a lot on this book, um, and in particularly, it's implied in the prequels that um, Anakin was a result. Anakin's birth, or more accurately, his conception, I guess, was a result of just the midi chlorians deeming it so, creating life within the womb of this woman on Tatooine who, there was no father involved in the childbearing, and he just like was a byproduct of the Force,
Right.
essentially. It's heavily implied in the movies, and even more heavily implied in the book,
Yeah. Right.
that the reason Anakin exists is because Darth Plagueis, in his experiments using metachlorians to influence life, to learn how to heal, to even create life or control death, or hinder death, or do away with it completely. At some point in this process, he accidentally created Anakin.
Hmm.
It never explicitly says that, but that is the very heavy implication of this book. So and of the movies too. So that's worth noting if you're curious, like, what was that weird part in The Phantom Menace where his mom just said, like, he didn't have a dad?
Right.
The implication is that this guy, Darth Plagueis, the master of Darth Sidious, accidentally created Anakin Skywalker. So kind of just to tie it all together to the movies a little bit more and provide a little bit of context in that
Right.
regard as well. Um, did we touch on Darth Maul very much at all?
Not at all, actually.
Okay, I don't even I don't I mean, we might have mentioned him, but that
I
was
mean, yeah, I
something
think we
else
mentioned it. Yeah.
that I briefly wanted to talk about, just that you see the origin of Maul in this book.
Yes. Right. Oh, I guess we
And
did a little bit.
it's cool because there's a Mother Townsend name drop in here as well. This Night Sister who was fleeing um Dathomir brings a 1-year-old Maul to Palpatine, and I was a little bit unclear, like, how she found him. Like, of
Right.
all the people she could have given this 1-year-old Dathomirian who's force sensitive, maybe she, like, had felt in the Force or something. I don't know. Um, but Palpatine kind of adopts Maul as a 1-year-old and raises him, and I guess raises would be a little bit
Right, yeah.
not exactly raising in a
Trains them.
trains him, yes, to be an assassin essentially. So it was kind of cool to see the origin of Maul in this book as well. If anyone is as avid
Right.
a Darth Maul fan as I, um, but I mean, there's so many things we could go into with this book that really provide context to the prequel trilogy, and I think that's the important thing I want to get across. It's that this book equally is a um, character study. It is as much a character study of Darth Plagueis as it is a laying the baseline and the outline of the pre Phantom Menace events. Like it makes Phantom
Right.
Menace make way more sense if you read this book first.
Right, right.
And you're not just going into Phantom Menace like why are they why are they blocking Naboo? Like what are these trade
Mm-hmm.
routes? Who's the Trade Federation? Why do they not like Naboo?
Right, 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 right.
Um, all of that information makes way more sense if you read this book first. So, um, anyways, side note, my last thing, and then I was going to let you kind of give your general summary and thoughts, if you had any more concluding thoughts, is that I just like the character of Darth Plagueis. This is a character that
Yeah.
I would love to see in live action. And maybe let me ask you this: I have a question for you, and for anyone listening too. Will Darth Plagueis, whether in physical form or even in reference, be in the Acolytes?
Oh. Well, Acolyte takes place in what? High Republic times though?
This Acolyte, I think, is only takes 100 years
Oh, 100 years
BBY.
before. Okay, BBY. I'm thinking of
Yeah.
yeah, okay, okay. So
So
that
it's totally
it's
on the
in that
table that
era,
we could see a
yeah.
young Plagueis during the Acolyte.
That would be a great addition because I mean, now that I've read this book, although again that it wasn't canon, but at one point it was considered. I don't know, was it considered canon at one point or was it
Yeah.
always
Well, I mean, before Disney bought Star Wars, there
Mhm.
wasn't, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't such thing as Legends novels.
Right, yeah.
Um, so for the very brief period of time between
Yeah.
the publishing of this book and the Disney acquisition, which I may probably would have been like less than a year,
Mhm.
because if Force Awakens came out in 15 and this came out in 12,
Yeah.
I don't know what year Disney purchased Star Wars, but it was probably like 2012, 2013,
Right,
somewhere in
yeah.
there.
It was like 4 months.
Yeah,
It was
something like that.
because you know these deals don't happen overnight, so they were probably already in the works.
Right.
I wonder if there was any talk about this not getting published because
Mm,
there was because like I said, like that type of acquisition does not happen in a month. So I'm sure early 2012 when this came out, I'm sure there was already talks going on, and I wonder if there was any because I did read that this book was supposed to come out a couple years before, but
hmm
it ended up getting shelved for a while. And I think actually the Darth Bane Rule of Two ended up coming out before
Right.
this book, which kind of would make sense if you're saying that it's kind of foundational, kind of to this book. But yeah, I'd be curious if there was ever any discussions about this book never making it out because of the pending acquisition from Disney.
Sure. Yeah, it's also interesting that they did delay it because I can think of an example of something in here that would not have existed if this book was released in 2008 as opposed to 2012.
Okay.
The Night Sister who drops off Maul to Palpatine in this book, and says there was another. He's a twin brother. Like there's another.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm assuming that that's referencing to Savage Press.
Right.
And this book was written and or released in 2012. And the Savage first time we see Savage Press in Clone Wars, I looked it up, is in 2010.
Oh, so it would not have been around yet. Because what
Right.
was it
So
supposed to be like 2008 or something that this was supposed to
yeah,
originally come out?
originally this was supposed to come out in 2008. So whatever, made it into the final version, it's probably safe to assume that a lot of it was not in the initial version of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a small example, but I bet there's a lot of other things like that too.
Right.
Anyways, um, yeah, for the few short months, I did look it up as well. Disney bought Lucasfilm the day before Halloween in 2012.
Wow.
So
I
This
mean,
was
not even a
this
year.
was yeah, this was canon for like 9 months.
Wow. That's kind of wild. But yeah, I bet
Yeah.
I wonder if there was, talk about it where they were like, you know what, maybe we don't release this book. Imagine trying to find this book. That would be kind of cool, right? Where they would be like,
Yeah.
there's this Darth Plagueis book out there. We can't even read it. And if people are just trying to find it all over the place, that'd be pretty cool Star Wars fandom lore.
Yeah. I know the Legends series, because this is technically considered Legends, used to be expanded universe.
Right.
Now, I don't know if the expanded universe is, when it was still a thing before it turned into Legends,
Right.
was considered canon or not. I don't know. That'd be a good question. I'm sure someone probably knows the answer to
And
that. Maybe
Vesuvi,
down in
we're gonna
yeah,
need you.
Vesuvi.
We need you for this one.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of cool mentions of characters in this book, like Dooku. You mentioned Qui-Gon, Maul, Padme is in this book as a
Hmm.
13-year-old queen at one point. Obi-Wan and Anakin at the end of the book too. There's kind of a fun scene in the epilogue where Obi-Wan and Anakin walk into the chancellor's office, and Obi-Wan is already scolding Anakin, and
Yeah.
Palpatine is like, "Good,
Yes.
he's already getting upset with the way his master's treating
It's
him."
the Mr. Burns from Simpsons. Excellent. That whole.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, each of us had a favorite part of the book we wanted to share. Did you have anything else you wanted to touch on in regards to the novel before talking about our favorite parts?
Well, I did want to tie it back to one other thing, and I wonder if, I mean, maybe it doesn't go directly to this, but I thought it would be worth mentioning. The whole in the Rise of Skywalker, the whole being able to
Yeah,
revive, each other like
I'm so glad you brought
back
this
and
up.
forth. Is this? You're telling me that this was it? Like it took Plagueis like 30 years to figure that one out, and they were able to figure it out in one movie. So I I'm wondering about that one.
Yeah, something that took a Dark Lord of the Sith, practically almost half his life to get to the point where he almost mastered it. They just did it like that, like it was
Right.
nothing. Also, in regards to the sequels, I was gonna mention that when it was revealed, Snoke, or I guess after Episode 7, walking out of the theaters, I was like, "That's Plagueis. That's Plagueis,"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then it just never happened, and it was like,
Oh, that would have been great. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
anyways, thought that worth bringing up and mentioning as well. So, um, if I had to pick a favorite part of this book, I mentioned most of them already. Um, I think the structure of the way James Luceno writes is really cool, because the prologue of the book is um, Palpatine reflecting on killing, or Sidious reflecting on killing his master Plagueis. The first chapter of the book is seeing how Plagueis kills his master
Hmm.
Tenebris, and then the last chapter of the book is
Yeah.
actually seeing how Sidious kills Plagueis. And so, these very key crucial moments in sort of how the apprentice eventually overtakes the master are depicted at the bookend moments of literally bookend moments.
Right.
So I think the way he writes is really cool. He infuses a lot of lore into the book, which I always love. Like, there's name drops in here. Like Death Watch was another one that he name dropped at
Hmm.
one point. All kinds of different species who so just his knowledge of the universe of Star Wars is I think probably unmatched of any Star Wars author. And then the other two things I mentioned were just the inclusion of Darth Maul and Dooku, because they're
Right.
some of my favorite characters, and especially Dooku. It's fun to kind of. Oh, actually, I have this here too. If you're gonna read this,
Nice.
I would recommend reading this first, because the Dooku who is like
We got
really
yeah. So
really
that's
upset
Jedi
at certain.
Lost.
Yes, Dooku Jedi Lost. Sorry, yeah, for those that aren't watching the video version of the podcast, if you're gonna read Dooku Jedi Lost, read Darth Plagueis first, because the Dooku who's really upset in this and just does not see eye to eye with the Jedi Order, um, you get a precursor of that Dooku in
Hmm.
here. You're like, oh yeah, the seeds of mistrust are really being sown. And while this one is not as in depth about Dooku, um, it's it sows the seeds. So,
Right.
anyways, lots of different things I could pick as my favorite part. But what about you?
I was surprised that it went into the same time period as the Phantom Menace. So I kind of expected this all to be something that happened before their precursor going into it. So to hear the names Anakin and Obi-Wan and Padme, and even like because those are early the early, I mean this was even before Padme was the queen, so even before that. So I thought this was really cool, and I'll admit the last third of the book was my favorite, obviously because of that, because of more of the action. Where the first two thirds was really building up to that moment, and I get it. That's kind of how you want to tell a story too, but where there were moments where I kind of again dazed off and wasn't really fully attentive. The last third of the book, I definitely was, where I'm just like, yeah, I remember that. So this was happening. Like you said, this was happening when the Anakin, I mean Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon first were on the ship, and when they get gassed and all that stuff. So like, okay, this is why that happened, and to have a lot of that set up for the stories that we already know. I mean, you think of like Rogue One, where you didn't really need that story so much, but it was really cool to get that story, and
Mhm.
ended up being some of the best Star Wars. So um the story of Palpatine, because that's what generally speaking, that's kind of what the story is the story of Palpatine becoming Sidious. And where it may be called Darth Plagueis, I really think that the focal point ended up being more of what Palpatine came to be. Spoiler alert, that's what we'll be talking about next week. But I think that's to see that story kind of happen over these over these chapters. It really fleshed out and made me understand his role a little bit more, not only in the kind of the Sith world, but really in the political world, where maybe again not every Star Wars fan is interested in, but I think that it is really important why he is so powerful, how he got to that point, and
Mhm.
to have that story now. I think it makes for a great character. Unfortunately, not canon, but I think the potential there was there from the beginning. So I and how it ties into like I said, how it tied into Phantom Menace, something that's familiar, something that scene by scene. They even mention a lot of Naboo and the Gungans and everything like that, and they didn't say Jar Jar's name by name, but you knew who
They
they were
did
talking about.
say, yeah,
They did mention a Gungan. I forgot the word they used. It was kind of like a goofy, but maybe
yeah.
not a goofy type of Gungan. But mentioning all that stuff, I just think that, and I wonder if they did that because they knew he wasn't as well received in Star Wars, so they're just like, we'll mention him but not say his name. So yeah, just the again the interweavings to existing media or existing movies, definitely was my favorite part of it.
Hashtag make Darth Plagueis canon.
Yep, let's do it.
The other interesting thing, just as a side note, I guess this, if you were to consider this book canon and not episode one, I think technically that would mean Maul was never a Sith Lord, because I don't think he ever obtains that title at any point in the novel
Correct.
before
Yeah.
he's killed, quote unquote. So
Right. Yeah.
the other thing I was thinking about, as I was reading it, is that almost adds more irony to the moment at the end of Phantom Menace, where Yoda and Mace are talking at the funeral of Qui-Gon with Palpatine present, and they're like, "But which one was killed, the master or the apprentice?" And then it sort of pans to Palpatine's face, and it's like, "Oh, he's the master." But I think the irony of that moment, if you take the book as canon, is that Maul was technically neither the master nor the
Right.
apprentice, and that it was the master who was killed in secret, and
Right.
now
Yeah.
Palpatine has assumed the mantle of the master. So just like kind of a little
Yeah.
bit of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
wordplay and something
Yeah.
that
And
I thought about.
yeah, and I was thinking about that. Like, Plagueis was around during Phantom Menace.
Right, for the
Yeah,
most of
yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah. So that's kind of what blew my mind. I'm like, wait, Plagueis is actually around during this.
Right. Basically, up until the point where Palpatine is elected chancellor,
Right.
Plagueis is alive in, technically not canonically alive, but,
Right.
if you were to match this book up with episode 1,
Hmm.
Plagueis is alive up until, like, the night before, Palpatine's election to Supreme Chancellor, which is
Yeah.
the majority of the movie.
Right.
Like, he knows about the death of, Maul when
Hmm.
before
That's right. Yeah.
Palpatine kills him. So, anyways, uh, yeah, I would love to see Plagueis in live action at some point. Tales of the Jedi, we get
Oh.
Plagueis. I want like a 50 episode season of Tales of the
Yeah. Yeah.
Jedi. That'd be great.
Yeah. Star Wars should take a vote on that. Which ones? Which Jedi do you want to be featured there?
Oh, that'd be great. I would love it. Well, honestly, like I could probably talk about this book for another hour if I wanted to. There's certainly parts that I'm sure we've like glanced over or missed or not mentioned. So if you've read this book and there's a part of it you're like they didn't mention it, leave a comment down below or on one of our socials or shoot us an email. We'd love to see what you have to say about the Darth Plagueis novel, which also is a good opportunity for us to once again pose our question that we're going to be asking both on the YouTube community tab as well as over on X sometime this weekend after the video version of the podcast goes live, or maybe even before. We'll have to see. Check the YouTube tab or X for the poll. Um, but the poll or the question will be: do you have a favorite Star Wars book? And then maybe check the poll options for some of if your favorite book is in there. But even if it's not, leave a comment on the video version of this podcast, letting us know what your favorite Star Wars book is. And if you haven't read any Star Wars books, if you've thought about reading one, or maybe even if you don't want to read any Star Wars books, let us know why down in the comments as well. These book reviews are always really fun because like, going into them, I'm like, "Oh, we could probably do this in, like, 20 minutes." And then we start doing it, and I'm like, "Man, these are the ones that we talk about the most," I feel like. So,
Right.
um, it's been a fun one, and of course, this was episode 65 of the podcast, which means next week is, episode 66, the Palpy episode, as we might informally be referring to it as. Next week, we're going to be talking about all things Emperor Palpatine, Darth Sidious, good old Sheev himself. Actually, side note, did you notice it didn't say the word
It
Sheev
didn't. Yeah. You
anywhere in this entire
because
book?
they only referred to him as Palpatine. That's true.
Yeah. Even when they introduce him, they never say his first name. I
Oh
thought that was
wow.
kind of weird. But we're going to be talking about him next week. So stay tuned for that. New episodes of the podcast go live every single Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern. And next week, what would that be? January 25th, episode 66, the Palpy episode, will be available here on YouTube as well as any audio platform you're listening to the podcast on currently. Speaking of YouTube, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, check out the video version of every Hoth Hangout podcast there, as well as Joey and I's reactions to all new Star Wars shows whenever they do go live here on YouTube as well. Additionally, you can contact us via email. Hothhangout@gmail.com is where we're reachable. Feel free to send us your Star Wars thoughts or comments or anything related or otherwise. We'd love to showcase those here on the pod. Additionally, the audio version of the Hoth Hangout podcast is available anywhere you get your pods, including Apple and Spotify. And if you're listening on a platform where you're able to leave a review, leave a 5-star review. We would appreciate it very much. And it allows the podcast to be discovered by other new people as well. We're also reachable on all the socials, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, or X. Remember that last one, there's going to be a poll released about your favorite Star Wars book sometime in the next few days. So be on the lookout for that as well. Joey, any last thoughts on, by the way, Joey today, I know we mentioned it at the top of the episode. Joey today doing all the behind the scenes work since Gibbo couldn't be with us for this one. So Extra shout out to Joey, and some more love in the comments as well for Joey on this one, doing all the behind the scenes work.
Yeah, this was our first like novel review, and
Hmm.
I thought it was a lot of fun. Full disclosure, Ben and I had zero prepared for this. We just said, all right, we're just going. Normally, we have a lot of bullet points if we watch a show together. Obviously, we're going to hit on certain plot points, but for this one, we decided to go old school. Gibbo wasn't here. When the cat is away, the mouse will play. So we definitely just decided just to kind of shoot by the hip here and just run with it. I had a lot of fun. It just reminded me of the old days of the first couple episodes of the pod here, where we'd go hour and a half. But we didn't go that bad though this time around. So no, this was a ton of fun. And I'm looking forward to, I don't know, other novels in the future. Maybe we'll tackle. But yeah, this was a good one. So much love and appreciation to James Luceno.
Yes. Also, full disclosure on my part, when Joey messaged me yesterday and said, "How's the book going?" I was on chapter 4. So I read I read so many pages of this book today. You have no idea. And I read it on 2.25 speed on Audible. So shout out to Audible, hashtag not sponsored, for getting me through to the end of the Darth
I
Plagueis
didn't know
book
you were that far behind.
in a timely manner. Hey, but I finished it and
You
I loved
finished it,
it.
yeah.
And by the way, if anyone's never read an audiobook while looking at the pages, two times speed works great when you can actually look at the words. So,
Nice.
anyways, we made it through our first novel review. Darth Plagueis was a fun one to read. Been a blast getting to talk about it here today with you, Joey. And a special shout out, even though he's not here, thank you to Gibbo the Wise, as his surname now is officially being referred to as, for producing the show, the video, and the assets. And without further ado, that does it for about the end of today's episode. Shout out to George Lucas. Shout out to Dave Filoni. Shout out to James Luceno for writing this incredible novel that we covered today. And until next week, when we'll be covering all things Emperor Palpatine, episode 66. Until then, we'll catch you any Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. We'll catch you in the next one, and may the Force be with you.